Every year, thousands of people go missing across the planet. And of those thousands of people, some of them go missing under very strange circumstances. One man, who is actually a former police detective named David Paulides, has spent years investigating these cases, and he's noticed similarities and patterns that'll shock you. Dave has spent plenty of time researching this topic, and he coined the term missing 411 cases. So today I've picked out a few of my favorite stories to share with you. On April 9th, 1952, 2-year-old Keith Parkins was out behind a barn on his property in Ritter, Oregon, playing with his older brothers. So eventually, after playing for a while, it was time for lunch, and the two older brothers left without Keith for some reason. Well, after a scolding from their mother, she went behind the barn where Keith had been playing to go find him, but she couldn't find him anywhere. Now, the family did a cursory search of the area and the property, but having found no trace of Keith, they realized that they needed to get the authorities involved quickly. Several hours into the search, professionals would find footprints that were very small and thought to be Keith's about 4 miles away from where he was last seen. They followed these tracks for a ways, but it wouldn't be until the next day that they would find Keith an astounding 12 miles away from where he initially went missing. Now, what's odd is Keith was missing his jacket and his hat, and they found him lying face down in the snow. Surprisingly, Keith was alive and he recovered just fine. So one thing you got to ask yourself with this case is, how does a 2-year-old travel over 12 miles in one night through sub-freezing temperatures, barbed wire fences, snow, farmland, woods? Famous survivalist Les Stroud had heard about this case, and he was called on to try and recreate the journey that Keith made within the same time frame, but he couldn't even do it. He also stated that it was impossible for a 2-year-old to accomplish, and I tend to take his word for it. He's a pretty experienced guy. Search and rescue manuals state that children 2 years old and younger are generally found 2 miles or less from the point that they were last missing, and that's on flat ground with no obstacles nearby. There's no doubt that something strange happened to 2-year-old Keith Parkins that day. What exactly happened, we'll probably never know. This next story is about 17-year-old Corey Fay. Corey was invited by his friend Mark to go hunting with him and another buddy near the Badger Creek Wilderness area, which is located in Oregon. Now, Corey was more than happy to join Mark on this excursion, as he had hunted before and he loved the outdoors. Now, Corey was a pretty competent outdoorsman, and he brought with him some extra survival equipment such as a solar blanket, a compass, extra ammunition, food, and a backpack to carry all of these things in. On November 3rd, 1991, the three hunters eventually got to their spot where they would be hunting, and they decided that they would split up so they could cover more ground and hopefully spot one of these elk. Unfortunately, as they all headed out in their separate directions, this would be the last time that anyone would see Corey Fay. Now, the group had initially decided to meet back up at their vehicle at around 6:30 p.m. that same day, but when the other two hunters got back, obviously, Corey wasn't there. Now, the friends immediately contacted the Wasco County Sheriff's Office, and a large search was started very soon. The search that was put together for Corey was quite massive, and it included over 250 ground searchers, helicopters equipped with FLIR, and 7 canines from the Rocky Mountain Search and Rescue. Unfortunately, after 10 days of searching and miles of ground being covered, they just couldn't find one trace of Corey, which was extremely odd. In September 1992, a couple of hunters were traveling along a ridgeline when eventually they spotted a backpack and a rifle laying on the ground. Now, the area that these items were located was about 10 miles away from the point that Corey was last seen. It would turn out that these items were Corey's, and his jacket was also found about a mile away. The hunters immediately contacted authorities, and when they went in there looking for a body, all they found were a couple of bone fragments of Corey's. What's interesting is that where Corey's bone fragments were found was not only 10 miles away from where he initially went missing, but also 3,000 feet higher in elevation. And at the time that Corey went missing, that means he would have been trudging through snow that was at least waist deep. Corey's family said that they had taught him to follow water downhill if he was ever lost in the woods. Why would Corey seemingly do the opposite and head uphill along a ridgeline through deep snow, also where it's colder? I just don't understand personally why Corey would have gone uphill in the situation that he was in. Of course, we don't know if maybe he was being chased by something or really what happened, but he knew that there was shelter down below in the tree line where there wasn't any snow, and he could have maybe started a fire or done something that would have increased his chances for survival. Also, why couldn't professionally trained dogs locate Corey when he went missing? If he was 10 miles away, they should have been able to pick up a scent, but the dogs didn't find any scent, which is definitely odd. And if he was dead at the time, the cadaver dogs that were brought in should have been able to smell his body, because human bodies leave off a scent, and these dogs are able to find bodies underground, underwater, and they're a pretty miraculous animal. Like so many other 411 cases, we're left with more questions than answers. So the last story is about a small boy named Glenn Pierce. And some of these 411 cases, you'll notice that young kids or very old people, or just anyone in general, sometimes travel extreme distances in an amount of time that you wouldn't think it would be possible for them to go that far. On October 18th, 1940, Glenn Pierce was playing in his front yard with his dog, and at some point he had just vanished. They were in a rural area on a homestead, but the next day more than 500 people responded, and they were searching for Glenn and his dog everywhere. They would eventually find Glenn and his dog 12 miles away from his homestead in a shack with his dog. That's a pretty extreme distance for a young boy to travel in just 12 hours, especially through the wilderness where there's dangerous animals and predators. When they asked Glenn what had happened to him, this is what he said. Glenn said he had been chasing some snakes, and at some point the 4-year-old had fallen asleep with his dog. So since he had fallen asleep, and we don't know for how long, that means that he would have had to be going even faster than 1 mile per hour through the wilderness during the night to get to that shack 12 miles away. This is a pretty odd story because if Glenn had been kidnapped, let's say, what would the kidnapper's motive have been? Bring him out to a shack 12 miles away in the middle of the woods and just leave him there? There was no sign of sexual assault. There was no harm done to his body. So it's kind of baffling as to why he would have been brought out there if he was kidnapped. If you guys enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing. And if you want to hear more videos about other missing 411 stories, please let me know in the comments. Also, if you are interested in this topic at all, I recommend getting these books by David Paulides. You can get them on his website, which I'll link in the video description. Don't buy them on Amazon because resellers are charging like over $100 for them, and the books are only $20-something.